For the most part, it's been a long time since any of us thought as a child. And, well, let me take that back. There's probably some of us that still do. But having said that, it comes, when a child comes into the world, they're a blank slate. They know nothing. They don't have any thought process at all. And it's only after they acquire some language skills and some communication skills that they are able to begin to ask questions and interact with what's going on around them. That's the way they learn, if you will. And they start associating concepts together when they do that, so that they gain knowledge, if you will. And that process takes place while they're growing up until they reach adulthood. And if you have children or if you watch children, you've seen what I'm talking about over time. I recently had the experience of being put back into the perspective of a child. And I had to take a step back and look at the world in a little bit different way when this occurred. And as I attempted to do this, I had to ask myself, how does a child come to wonder about complex concepts? And how do those complex concepts affect them as they're growing up? How are they shaping their minds? How are they shaping their character? And my reason for contemplating all of this came about one day as I was sitting with my grandson, actually at the Feast of Tabernacles is when this occurred. My grandson is 10 years old, bright boy. And we weren't talking about anything related to what was about to occur. We were just doing our grandson and grandpa kind of conversations and interactions at 10 years old, right? So keep that age in mind. Then, seemingly out of nowhere and totally out of context, he turned to me and he asked, "Pappy, where did war come from?" Where did war come from? And I got to tell you, I was taken back by the question. That was totally unexpected. I was also deeply saddened in my heart from that question. How and why had my young grandson come to wonder about such a horrific human tragedy? Why did his little mind seek to understand one of the ugliest aspects of mankind? Yeah, my grandson is a smart little boy. He's very inquisitive, very intuitive. And I understand why he asked the question, but it is an indication that as he's going through this process of growing up, he is constantly having his innocence stripped away. It's each year that he continues to grow. And it's the loss of his innocence that touched me deep inside. I'm reminded of what Satan told Eve about eating the fruit in the garden. Remember what he said? He said, "For God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." And so my grandson, like all the rest of us, is going through this process of living in this life, and we're all learning good and we are learning evil. And I pray that God will protect him as he continues to learn the lessons of good and evil. So, what is the answer to his question? Where did war come from? So let's start with where we're at today. War is very familiar to us. There has been a war in progress somewhere on the face of the earth the entire time that we have been living. In fact, you may not realize this, there has never been a year in recorded history when there was not a war going on in all of recorded history. Let that sink in for a minute. Let that sink in. Never a time in recorded history when there was no war. That fact is a big part of the answer to my grandson's question. We'll come back to that a little later. You know, in ancient times when wars were fought, it was sticks and stones, right? That's kind of the way things started out. And the limits of those materials prevented the advancement of weapons for a while, and thus it limited the amount of killing that could be done, right? But that didn't last. That limitation did not last. It wasn't long before people sharpened sticks and they found ways to propel sticks and stones farther distances. And so the killing rose. And thus became what came to be known as in the modern world as the arms race. The arms race is the continual improvement and advancement of weapons. The purposes of the arms race is to attain military superiority over others and to kill more effectively. With each new weapon, a chase to overcome that weapon ensues. We want to develop a better one than what is already there. And there's this entire business model that is called the defense industry in our modern world today that is in place to advance technological developments to meet that goal. Kill more effectively and have a better weapon than the one previously designed. And so, for thousands of years, man has spent his intelligence, his time, and his financial resources to continually improve upon the ways of mass killing. We have now reached the pinnacle of that development. The pinnacle. Through this process of weapon development, we are now able to wipe out every human being on the face of the earth within a couple of days. Every human being on the face of the earth. And yet, mankind is not even satisfied with that capability. We are continuing to refine that capability to kill everyone. There's a saying in our world today, it says, follow the money. And by looking at the amount of money we spend on this wicked human endeavor, we get an indicator of just how vast this problem is. Consider this. The total military spending in the whole world for just 1 year, is $2.7 trillion. $2.7 trillion. The United States represents 1 trillion of that number. The next closest nation in this spending spree is China at 246 billion, or only 9%. The United States has 35% of the spending. The next nation is 9% with China, and then Russia follows behind at 5% with 149 billion. I'll tell you, the fourth one is Germany, interestingly enough. Think of the resources that the nations are plowing into this endeavor. As they do so, what are they doing? They're sacrificing the quality of life for their own people as we pursue this endeavor of constantly improving weapons. What could we accomplish with all of those resources if we were not pursuing war every single day? You know, is that the answer to all of this? Can we just stop spending our time and money on such pursuits and it goes away? Is the problem the defense industry, the business of war? Is that the problem? Can we just take all the guns and, as the old song says, I don't know if you guys remember this, throw them to the bottom of the sea? Is that the answer? Take away the guns, put them in the bottom of the sea. Suppose that the United States stopped spending any money on their military completely. What would happen? They would no longer be a threat to any other nation, right? What would happen? Other nations would destroy us very quickly. Very, very quickly. Not just because we didn't have guns. That's not the core reason. Why would they do it? If there are no guns, no bombs, no artillery, shouldn't that solve the problem of killing? Can't we just eliminate them and everybody get along? You know, there's a lot of people that think that way. They live in this kind of fantasy world that that's the way that might be. But weapons are not the cause of war. They are not. And that brings us back to my grandson's question. Where did war come from? When he asked me that question, I had to think to myself for a minute, and I took a pause before I answered him. I had to think of the most truthful, simplistic, and fundamental way in order to convey this to a child, a 10-year-old child, right? And as I thought about how I was going to answer my grandson, I came to realize the answer is really quite simple. Very simple. I told him it started with Cain and Abel. Cain and Abel. Turn over to Genesis 4. Genesis 4, beginning in verse 1. Adam lay with his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. And she said, "With the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man." Later, she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now Abel kept flocks, and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. Sounds good. But Abel brought fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor, very important word here. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry and his face was downcast. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must master it." Now Cain said to his brother Abel, "Hey Abel, let's go out to the field." Right? And while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. This is the first time that a human being attacked another human being. It's the first time with malicious intent that another human being was killed. It is the first murder. Notice, though, that Abel had no idea what was happening, right? You want to go out to the field? Let's take a walk. Okay, great. Out they go. Abel had done nothing to provoke Cain into this action. Didn't do anything. He didn't even know that Cain was harboring these bad feelings toward him, or he wouldn't have gone out to the field. He didn't know. Right? Cain had allowed a wicked thought in his mind to develop until it finally became an intent. It was a thought, then it became an intent. And he nurtured that intent and let those feelings grow and mature until he acted on them. Then he created a plan to execute those feelings, make it happen. Why? Why did Cain do that? What was it that made Cain so upset? According to the story here, it was the fact that Cain looked with favor upon Abel's offering and did not look with favor upon Cain's offering. Cain's anger came from his pride, his jealousy, and his shame. Cain wanted God's favor. He had a desire for God's favor. He wanted God's approval. Notice what God said here. God immediately warned him to not let those bad feelings grow. Don't do that, he said. He said, if you don't get over those feelings and do what is right, sin is going to be waiting there for you as a natural consequence of harboring these bad intentions. That's what happens. Instead of letting them go, Cain nurtured those feelings of hatred, and he kept those feelings alive, and he fed them until what happened? He took action. He acted on them and killed his own brother. Cain wanted God's favor, and he wanted God's approval, even though he didn't deserve those things. He didn't deserve God's favor. He didn't deserve God's approval. And he couldn't stand it that another person, Abel, had that approval, had that favor. Couldn't stand it. What is it? What is it when we want things that other people have, but they don't belong to us, and it is not right for us to have them? What is that? Does that sound familiar? It should. It's coveting. It's the definition of coveting. That's what it is. Cain coveted God's approval, but it was not right for him to do so. He had not done what was right in God's eyes. God had told him if he would do what was right, he would get the favor. If he was not willing to do what was right, he would not receive the favor. It all depended on what Cain was willing to do. Apparently, Cain was not willing to do right and was willing to kill another human being as a result of that. Rather than letting those feelings go, he changed his own behavior and he became something that he wasn't. That coveting changed his character into something that he wasn't before. You know, it's just like God warned him. Coveting led to sin. Sin was waiting at the door. If he couldn't overcome the coveting, sin was right there. Turn over to Deuteronomy 5. Deuteronomy 5. And verse 21. You know this scripture. It's the recounting of the Ten Commandments. Look what it says, verse 21. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. You shall not set your desire on your neighbor's house or land, his manservant or maidservant, his ox or his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Anything, even God's favor. Don't set your heart on those things, not in the wrong way. We are not to set our desire on these kinds of things. Why? Setting our desire on things is to become obsessed with them. That's what it means. Can't get it out of your mind. Constantly thinking about it. And it's allowing those things to consume our mind and our heart. And when that occurs, when a thought like that occurs, a coveting, if you will, consumes our mind and our heart, we are putting those things before God. Are we not? Sure we are. And what is putting things before God? Idolatry. It's idolatry. Turn over to Colossians 3 and verse 5, and I want to use the New King James Version of this scripture. Colossians 3 and verse 5. And it says, "Therefore, put to death your members which are on the earth, fornication, uncleanness, passion, evil desire, and covetousness, which is idolatry." Pretty plain and simple right there. All these things are idolatry. The desire to have things that are not lawful for us to have is at the root of many sins. Many sins. And just like God said, other sins are waiting for us. If we can't get over that coveting, other sins are waiting there to begin. They're going to follow right behind them. And that's our human nature. It can even lead to murder, just as it did with Cain and Abel. You know, coveting is one of the most basic and harmful of human behaviors. And you know what? It starts when we are very, very young. I have witnessed this, and maybe some of you have as well. A child walk over to another child and just snatch something out of that child's hand. Why? Because they wanted it. They didn't give any thought as to what the other child was doing. That wasn't important. They just snatched that right out of there. It's kind of interesting to see. And if you ask them, why'd you do that? I wanted it. That's where coveting starts. I'll give you another example. I've even seen, perhaps you've seen this too, particularly with siblings. You'll have a mother that's engaging with the child, they're doing something or other, and here comes a sibling and wants to wiggle in between the child and the mother because they are craving that attention. They're willing to push the other one out of the way to get that attention. Why? Because they want it. That's coveting. That's the basics of coveting. And it starts when we are very, very young. Very young. Now, let me go back to what I mentioned earlier. There's never been a single year recorded in history when there was not a war. Not one. And the reason is that because all of humanity, since their childhood, has been immersed in the sin of coveting. It goes all the way back. We want what is not ours to have. War has been perpetuated by mankind through continuous coveting. That's at the root of it. Throughout history, the nations of this world have gone to war to steal land, natural resources, food, wealth, and even to enslave other populations as part of that for all the purposes of coveting. They want something that they don't have. They want to fulfill the things that they have set their desire upon. You know, these things are not lawful for them to take. Like Cain, these nations are willing to shed the blood of millions of people to get what they want, to get what they set their desire on. Think of all the sins mankind has committed because of coveting. It's mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling. A case could be made that coveting is at the root of breaking all of the commandments, isn't it? I mean, we can certainly see a case for them in the case of adultery, stealing, murder, lying, and dishonoring our parents even. Those are all rooted in coveting. We're putting something else above these things, above God. All of these things are idolatry. We're putting our thoughts and our wills, our desires, above the will of God. Turn to James 4. Again, I like the New King James Version translation of this passage. James 4. James 4 and beginning in verse 1. And right here is the same question my grandson asked. Right here. Look what he says, verse 1. Where do wars and fights come from among you? It's the same question. Do they not come from your desires for pleasure that war in your members? This deep-rooted desire that we have, this coveting desire that we have that's wrong? You lust and do not have. You murder and covet and cannot obtain. You fight and war. You do not have because you do not ask. And you ask and do not receive because you ask amiss, that you may spend it on your pleasures, on your desires. Wow. It just hits right to the core of it. There it is. There it is. That's the answer to my grandson's question. Right there. War comes from the unlawful desire and lust to have things that belong to someone else. And they're not right for us to have. You know, those unlawful desires can take the form of a lot of different things, particularly in the modern world. Think about it. They can be property, wealth, food, resources, and even someone else's wife. But they can also be prestige, honor, respect, power, and control. They can even be seeking God's approval and favor in an unlawful way. Just like Cain. Just like Cain. When we harbor those unlawful desires in our hearts, when we feed those feelings with more hatred and ungodly attitudes, when we let those feelings consume us, sin is waiting at the door. All we have to do is open that door, and here it comes. Some worse sin will be right there, and we'll go through those problems. When my grandson asked me where war came from, I don't think he realized as a 10-year-old boy how big of a question he was asking. It's a really big question. It's a complex question. I use the story of Cain and Abel because that's at the root of it. Coveting is at the root of war. That's where it comes from. I hope that his parents will expound upon why coveting is such a bad thing, even at a child's level. It's a bad thing. It's not just kids being kids. You got to make sure you address those kinds of things early. Wanting things that don't belong to them is the start of coveting. And I hope all parents will address that when children are very young. Our Father has shown his children through his word why the sin of coveting is so bad and what it leads to. He has warned us since the time of Cain that coveting leads to other sins that are just waiting at the door. And it even leads to the ultimate sin of war. Besides the warning given by our Father and his word, history has written this awful lesson in the blood of hundreds of millions of human beings. May God help us to see that at the root of it is coveting, and help us to root that out of our lives and out of our minds.